All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Amelia, architect. The fabric of the chaise lounge was rough against my fingertips, a nubby beige wool that seemed to absorb the low, soothing tones of Dr. Evans' voice rather than reflect them. Amelia, she was saying, her words measured and gentle, we've talked about building bridges of communication. Ethan, when Amelia expresses a need for transparency, how does that land for you? I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my own hands, at the faint silver callus on my middle finger from a lifetime of holding a pencil, a stylus. These hands had drawn blueprints for homes, for structures meant to withstand storms and time. They had traced the lines of our children's faces, had built a life, a family, a fortress of shared years. 12 of them. And now, sitting in this sterile, tastefully appointed room, they felt like they were made of glass. It feels like an accusation, Ethan said, his voice a familiar baritone that now sounded like a recording, rehearsed and flat. Like I'm constantly under audit. I'm here, aren't I? That should count for something. Here. The word hung in the air, thick with the scent of lavender diffuser and unspoken lies. He was here, but he was a hologram. The man I'd married. The one who'd cried when our daughter was born, who'd built a treehouse with me in a weekend, splinters and all, who'd known I took my coffee with a splash of oat milk and exactly 2 sugars. That man had been gradually replaced by this polished, distant stranger who started going to the gym 6 times a week and had a new, almost aggressive cologne that smelled like cedar and betrayal. My phone, an extension of my hand in my professional life, was dead on the coffee table between us. His was clutched in his fist, a black slab of obsidian, a vault. Dr. Evans was about to respond when Ethan's phone, set to silent, lit up. The screen glowed, a bright, intrusive rectangle in the dim, calming light of the room. It was a text message notification, and the name that flashed on the screen was Jenna Person Female. My blood went quiet. Jenna, his personal trainer. The one with the relentlessly positive Instagram feed and the hands that, according to the tagged photos, were always correcting his form. I didn't think. It was an architect's reflex, a need to inspect the source of a structural fault. My hand, the one with the callus, darted out, my fingers brushing against the cool glass of his phone. "Who's Jenna?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, a calm before the quake. He flinched. It wasn't just a startle. It was a full-body recoil. A violent, instinctual jerk that pulled the phone to his chest as if my touch had been a brand. His eyes, usually so guarded, widened with a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. The air in the room didn't just get heavy, it solidified. It became a wall of ice between us. In that infinitesimal fraction of a second, that flinch, the entire foundation of our 12-year marriage crumbled into dust. It was more eloquent than a confession, more damning than any photograph. It was the body's raw, unscripted testimony. A foundation I had built my life upon had just been revealed to be rotten, termite-ridden, ready to collapse. Dr. Evans fell silent. Ethan was stammering, It's just my trainer. She's confirming a session." I stopped hearing him. The sound was replaced by a high-pitched whine in my ears, the sound of a steel beam buckling under an impossible load. I saw his mouth moving, forming words that were now just meaningless shapes, like debris falling in slow motion. I saw the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, the new sharpness of his jawline from all those hours with Jenna Person Female. I saw the wedding band on his finger, a band I had designed myself, a simple, elegant loop of platinum that was supposed to symbolize something infinite, unbreakable. It was a lie, all of it. The late nights at the office, the new, intense focus on his health, the way he'd become critical of my lack of ambition outside of work, as if raising our children and running a successful architecture firm were trivial pursuits. It was all scaffolding around this central, ugly truth. I stood up. The movement was fluid, automatic, as if I were observing my own body from a great height. "I need to go," I said, my voice still that terrifyingly calm, level plane. "Amelia, wait," Ethan pleaded, starting to rise. Dr. Evans held up a hand. "Amelia, perhaps we should process this moment. This is a significant—" I didn't let her finish. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking a precise, staccato rhythm on the polished wooden floor. the sound of a retreat, a surrender, but also the first, sharp notes of a reckoning. I didn't look back. I made it to my car, a sensible SUV filled with goldfish crackers and forgotten sippy cups, and I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly the callus on my finger turned white. And then, the storm broke. It wasn't tears, not at first. It was a sound that tore out of me, a raw, guttural thing that had no place in the pristine parking lot of a therapist's office. It was the sound of everything I believed in being violently deconstructed. I screamed until my throat was raw, my forehead pressed against the cool leather of the steering wheel. I thought of his flinch, that fucking flinch. It played on a loop behind my eyes, a 2-second film strip of our destruction. I drove home on autopilot, the Michigan autumn a blur of fiery reds and oranges outside my window, a beautiful death I was too numb to appreciate. The house, our house, the one I had painstakingly restored, every cornice and crown molding a testament to my love and my skill, felt like a tomb. It was his space too. His smell was in the curtains. His favorite chair sat by the fireplace. The ghost of his laughter echoed in the hallway. I walked from room to room, a stranger in my own life. The living room, where we'd cuddled on the sofa. The kitchen, where we'd cooked meals side by side. Our bedroom. The air was thick with the memory of him. I couldn't breathe. And then my architect's brain, the part of me that solved problems, that took empty spaces and gave them purpose, that identified load-bearing walls and weak foundations, kicked in. It was a survival instinct, cold and brilliant. This was not my home anymore. It was a monument to a lie. I went to the garage and found the cans of paint, a crisp, clean alabaster white. I grabbed rollers, trays, drop cloths. I didn't change my clothes. I pulled my hair into a messy bun and I started in the living room. I moved his chair, the heavy leather one he loved, into the center of the room and draped it with a cloth. I rolled the white paint over the deep burgundy wall he had chosen. It wasn't just paint, it was an eradication. With every stroke, I was covering his presence, his choices, his memory. The white was a blank slate. It was a void. It was peace. I painted through the night. When my arms ached, I switched hands. When the sun rose, casting long, accusing shadows across the half-painted room, I didn't stop. I was a woman possessed. I was deconstructing the old world, beam by beam, memory by memory, to see if there was anything left underneath worth saving. I was no longer Amelia, the wife. I was Amelia, the architect of my own ruin, and from this blank white canvas, I would have to design something new or perish in the emptiness. The white was blinding. It was a surgical white, a sterile white, the white of a bone bleached by the sun and stripped of all life. For 3 days, the house had smelled of acrylic and anguish, a sharp, suffocating odor that clung to the back of my throat. Now the smell was fading, but the silence it left behind was louder. I stood in the center of the living room, the drop cloths rolled into paint-stained logs in the corner, the furniture shoved back into vague, unfamiliar arrangements. The burgundy was gone. Every trace of Ethan's preferred palette, the deep reds, the muted greens, the masculine, clubby hues, had been annihilated under a relentless, glacial white. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a gallery of my own derangement, a canvas for my grief. The children were at my sister's. I told them Mommy was doing a big, fun home makeover and that they were having a super special sleepover. Lily, my 8-year-old pragmatist, had looked at me with Ethan's eyes and asked, "But does Daddy like white?" The question had been a tiny, precise needle straight into my heart. I'd managed a smile, my face feeling like cracked plaster. "We'll see, sweetie, it's a surprise." There were no surprises left for me. The flinch had told me everything. In the days that followed the therapy session, Ethan had tried to call, then text, his messages evolving from defensive, "This is a massive overreaction, Amelia," to pleading, "Please, let's talk. We can fix this," to angry, "You can't just lock me out of my own house." I'd read them all, each one a brick I used to build a higher wall around myself. He was staying in a hotel, his hotel. I wondered if Jenna Person female was there, correcting his form on the hotel bed. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It pressed in on my eardrums, a high-frequency hum of absence. I'd wander from room to room, my socks whispering on the hardwood floors, and see only ghosts. The ghost of us decorating our first Christmas tree in this room. The ghost of him teaching a wobbly Lily to ride her bike in the hallway. The ghost of our son Noah taking his first steps toward his father's outstretched arms. The memories were no longer warm, they were malicious, playing out like snuff films on the blank white walls. I was an archaeologist of my own life, digging through layers of happiness only to find the rot at the very bottom. My work had always been my sanctuary. Architecture was order. It was logic. It was solving problems with grace and strength. But when I opened my laptop, the blueprints and CAD drawings looked like hieroglyphics from a dead civilization. I couldn't concentrate. The math wouldn't resolve. The lines wouldn't straighten. My own profession, the core of my identity, had abandoned me. I was an architect who could no longer envision a future. It was in this void that the pottery class advertisement found me. It was a targeted ad, a cruel algorithm somehow sensing my shattered state. It popped up on my social media feed, a beautifully shot video of hands covered in wet, gray clay, spinning on a wheel, transforming from a formless lump into a graceful, symmetrical vessel. The caption read, "Find your center, reclaim your creativity. Beginner pottery classes start Monday." It felt like a sign, or a mockery. My hands, which could draft the precise schematics for a 50-story building, were now useless. They couldn't hold a marriage together. They couldn't stitch my family back into one piece. Maybe they could get dirty. Maybe they could make something, anything, even if it was ugly and misshapen. I signed up. It was an act of pure desperation, a white flag raised to the universe. The following Monday, I walked into the Community Arts Center, a place that smelled of turpentine, old wood, and damp clay. It was a smell that was immediately, comfortingly physical. The class was a mix of bored-looking retirees and earnest young hipsters. I felt like an imposter in my starch-clean jeans and minimalist sweater, a stark contrast to the bohemian chaos of the studio. Our instructor, a serene woman named Sage with silver hair braided down her back, guided us to our wheels. "Don't come to the clay with expectations," she said, her voice calm as a deep lake. "Come with curiosity. The clay will tell you what it wants to be. Your job is to listen." I sat before the lump of cold, gray earthenware, the wheel humming ominously under my hands. I dipped my fingers in water and touched it. It was cold, slimy, and utterly inert. I pressed my foot on the pedal and the wheel began to spin. I tried to center the clay, as Sage had demonstrated. It was a fundamental, vital act. Without a centered lump, you could build nothing. It would wobble, collapse, fly off. My clay did not want to be centered. I pushed, I pulled, I cupped my hands, applying pressure that I calculated with an engineer's mind. But the clay fought back. It wobbled violently, slapping against my palms, spraying muddy water onto my pristine sweater. It was chaos. It was rebellion. It was a physical manifestation of the turmoil inside me. I gritted my teeth, pressing harder, trying to force it into submission. The lump bulged, leaned, and with a final, wet sigh, it slumped into a useless, lopsided pancake. Tears of frustration welled in my eyes. I, Amelia, who could calculate the wind load on a skyscraper, could not center a fucking lump of dirt. It felt like the ultimate failure. I looked around at the others. A young man with a man bun was already pulling a graceful, cylindrical form from his wheel. A grandmotherly type was happily creating a lopsided but cheerful-looking bowl. I was the only one failing. Sage appeared at my shoulder. "You're fighting it," she said softly. "You're using force. Architecture is about force, isn't it? Compression, tension, load-bearing." Her perception was unnerving. "But this is about surrender. It's a partnership. Feel the clay. Listen to its rhythm, guide it, don't command it." She placed her hands over mine. Her touch was cool and sure. Together, we wet the clay again. "Breathe," she whispered. "The clay feels your breath. It feels your heartbeat through your hands. If you are rigid, it will be rigid. If you are chaotic, it will be chaos. You must find the balance between control and letting go." We started the wheel again. This time, I didn't fight. I let the spin happen. I felt the cool, slick mass moving under my palms, a living, breathing thing. I stopped trying to make it center, and instead, I allowed it to find its center. I breathed deeply in and out, and slowly, miraculously, the wobbling ceased. The clay became a perfect, spinning dome, a miniature planet orbiting between my hands. A sob caught in my throat. It was the first thing I had managed to hold together since the world fell apart. For the next hour, I worked in a trance. I pulled the centered clay upward, forming walls. They were thick in some places, perilously thin in others. My first vase collapsed. My second one looked like a drunkard's hat. But my third had a certain clumsy, honest charm. It was asymmetrical, its rim dipped on one side, and the surface was marred by the shaky fingerprints of my trembling hands. But it stood. It was a vessel. It could hold something. As I carefully wire-cut my creation from the wheel and set it on the board to be fired, I felt a sensation I hadn't felt in weeks. A flicker of pride. It wasn't the proud, professional satisfaction of a completed project. It was quieter, more fundamental. It was the pride of creation from destruction, of making form from formlessness. I left the studio that night, my hands stained with clay, my sweater ruined, but my spirit felt clean. Like the white walls of my house, I was a blank slate. Scarred, empty, but full of potential. The next morning, I forced myself to go to the office. My firm, Henderson and Associates, was located in a sleek, glass and steel building in downtown Detroit. I'd been avoiding it, the weight of my professional life feeling like another failing structure. But the memory of the centered clay gave me a sliver of courage. I pushed through the glass doors, bracing for the concerned looks and the whispered conversations I was sure were happening. My partner, David, a bear of a man with a heart of gold, looked up from his desk, and his face broke into a relieved grin. "Amelia, God, it's good to see you. We've been holding down the fort, but the Larson Project is a beast. We need your magic." The Larson Project. A massive office renovation for a new tech firm. It was our biggest contract this year. I'd initialed the concepts, but the detailed schematics were behind schedule. My delay was costing the firm money. "I'm on it," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. I retreated to my glass-walled office, a space I had designed to be flooded with light. I spread the blueprints for the Larson Project on my large drafting table. It was a complex redesign of a historic warehouse into a modern, open-plan office. The problem was integrating the new HVAC and electrical systems without destroying the original timber frame and brickwork. It was a puzzle I would have normally relished, but my mind was still a storm of white paint and spinning clay. I couldn't focus. The lines on the paper blurred. The problem felt insurmountable. I was failing here, too. Frustrated, I slammed my hand on the table. "Damn it! Trouble with the existing load-bearing walls?" The voice came from my doorway. It was a calm, baritone voice, unfamiliar. I looked up, startled. A man stood there, leaning against the doorframe. He was tall, with the kind of build that suggested he used his hands for more than typing. Broad shoulders in a simple, well-fitting Henley, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His hair was a tousled, dark brown, streaked with gray at the temples, and he had a pair of reading glasses perched on his head. In his hands was a rolled set of drawings, but it was his eyes that held me. They were a warm, intelligent hazel, and they were looking at my blueprints with a knowing, sympathetic expression. "I'm sorry," I said, flustered. "Can I help you?" He stepped into my office, his presence immediately filling the space. He didn't feel like an intrusion, he felt like a grounding wire. "Liam Walsh," he said, extending a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, his skin warm and slightly calloused, a working man's hand. "I'm the structural engineer on the Larson Project. David said you were back and might need a fresh pair of eyes." He gestured to the blueprints. "I've been studying the original building specs. The brickwork on the north wall isn't just decorative, it's integral. The previous architects missed that. You're trying to run a main conduit through a wall that's already carrying more load than it should." He unrolled his own drawings next to mine. They were meticulous, hand-annotated with a clear, precise script. He pointed with a pencil. "See here, the stress fractures. If we try your current plan, we'd be compromising the entire structure. But," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, "if we reroute the conduit through this secondary column here and use a lighter gauge ductwork, we can preserve the integrity and even expose the original timber here as a design feature. It'll be stronger and, frankly, more beautiful." I stared at him, then at the drawings, then back at him. He had seen the problem in minutes, the fundamental flaw I had been too blind, too grief-stricken to see. And he hadn't just identified it. He had presented an elegant, simple solution. It was more than competence. It was a kind of genius. You just solved the problem I've been wrestling with for 2 weeks, I whispered, my voice thick with a confusing mix of humiliation and overwhelming relief. He gave a small, humble shrug, a faint smile touching his eyes. It's what I do. I look at the bones of things. I find the weak points and help figure out how to make them strong again. He looked directly at me, and his gaze was so deep, so perceptive, it felt like he was looking past my professional facade and straight at the cracks in my own foundation. Sometimes, the most beautiful designs come from working with the existing structure, not fighting against it. His words echoed sages from the pottery studio with an uncanny resonance. Guide it, don't command it. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of my marriage and the shaky first steps of my rebirth, Liam Walsh wasn't just a structural engineer. He was a man who understood foundations. And for the first time since the world went white, I felt a tremor of something other than despair. It was the faint, terrifying, and exhilarating sensation of solid ground beneath my feet. The solution was so elegant it was embarrassing I hadn't seen it myself. Liam's idea to reroute the conduit was more than just a fix, it was a revelation. It respected the building's history, its bones, turning a structural weakness into a celebrated feature. For the first time in weeks, the professional fog in my brain lifted. The lines on the blueprint snapped into sharp, logical focus. I could see it again. This is brilliant, I said, my voice laced with a reverence I usually reserved for landmark structures. Liam shrugged again, that same humble, effortless gesture. It's just physics and a bit of respect for the old girl. He tapped the drawing of the brick warehouse. She's been standing for 100 years. We shouldn't fight her. We should help her stand for 100 more. Help her stand. The words resonated in the hollowed-out chambers of my heart. I felt like that warehouse, a historic ruin, my own structural integrity compromised, on the verge of collapse. We spent the next 2 hours hunched over the drawings, our heads closed together, the scent of his faint, clean soap, something with sandalwood, mixing with the smell of paper and ink. He didn't just give me the solution and leave. He stayed. He explained the load calculations, discussed material options, and listened, truly listened, to my design ideas for integrating the exposed timber. He remembered small, offhand comments I'd made weeks ago about the client's preference for natural light. You mentioned the Larson CEO is a stickler for morning light in the common areas, he said, pointing to a different section. If we shift this interior window bank just 10 degrees east, we can catch the sunrise through this original arched window. It'll create a focal point we can build the entire atrium around. I stared at him, stunned. No one, not even David, paid that much attention. Ethan had certainly never remembered the minutiae of my work. My professional life had been something he tolerated, a separate universe from his own. Liam's ability to not only hear, but retain and apply these tiny details felt like a form of deep respect. It was a quiet, powerful validation of my expertise, of my very presence. It was the antidote to the flinch. When we finally leaned back, the main schematic was transformed. It was better, stronger, more beautiful than my original design. A collaborative masterpiece. I owe you a coffee. At least, I said, rubbing a sore spot on my neck. You just saved my project and probably my professional reputation. He smiled, a genuine, crinkling around the eyes smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. I never turned down good coffee, but the saving was a joint effort. You had the vision, I just checked the math. As he gathered his drawings to leave, he paused at the doorway, his gaze falling on the clumsy, fired clay vase I'd brought from my first pottery class. It sat on my bookshelf, a stark, earthy lump amidst the sleek modernity of my office. That's interesting, he remarked, his head tilted. Organic, imperfect, it has character. It's a testament to my inability to center clay, I said with a self-deprecating laugh, the memory of my frustration still fresh. He turned his hazel eyes back to me, and they were soft, understanding. On the contrary, he said quietly, it takes immense strength to allow for imperfection. Most of my clients want to hide the flaws, cover them up with steel and concrete. It takes a different kind of courage to let the wobbles show and call it art. His words settled over me like a balm. He saw the vase not as a failure, but as courage. He saw me not as a broken woman, but as someone capable of a different kind of strength. He gave a small nod and left, leaving a silence in my office that was no longer empty, but full of potential. The rest of the week passed in a strange, new rhythm. Mornings were dedicated to the Larson project, which now flowed with an exhilarating ease. My confidence, both as an architect and a woman, began a slow, tentative reconstruction. Afternoons were for pottery. I returned to the studio, to the spinning wheel and the cold, forgiving clay. Sage's words, now echoed by Liam, played in my mind. Guide it, don't command it. Allow for imperfection. My hands were learning a new language. They were less rigid, more responsive. I still made lopsided bowls and vases that collapsed, but the failures no longer felt catastrophic. They felt like lessons. Each lump of clay was a rehearsal for my own rebuilding. I was learning to find my center, not by force, but by patience and a gentle, consistent pressure. One evening, as I was carefully trimming the foot of a slightly wobbly but decidedly vase-like object, my phone vibrated on the stool beside me. It was Ethan, again. This time, it wasn't a text, but a call. The screen lit up with his name, a stark reminder of the world outside this sanctuary of creation and calm. The sight of his name sent a jolt of cold anxiety through me, so sharp I nearly ruined the vase. My first instinct was the old one, a frantic need to answer, to manage his emotions, to fix the problem. But my hands, covered in slick gray mud, stayed firmly on the spinning clay. I watched the phone until it went to voicemail. The silence that returned was my own. I had chosen it. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I had chosen the centered clay over the chaotic call. I had chosen myself. The following Monday, Liam was back at my office, this time to review the final structural revisions. Our collaboration was easy, fluid. We spoke in a shorthand of technical terms and shared understanding. After we'd signed off on the last drawing, he hesitated. "There's a new exhibit at the Art Institute," he said, not looking at me, but at the cityscape through my window. Structural expressionism in modern architecture. I was thinking of going this weekend. It might be relevant. For the Larson project, I mean. He finally met my eyes, and there was a tentative, hopeful question in them that had nothing to do with work. My heart performed a complicated, terrified flutter. This was a date. He was asking me on a date. The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. I was still married. I was a mess of raw nerve endings and fresh paint. Was I ready for this? Could I trust my own judgment, which had so completely failed me with Ethan? The ghost of the flinch whispered a warning. But then I looked at Liam, at his calm, steady presence, at the way he remembered the small details, at the respect he showed for both my work and my wonky pottery. He represented a future built on a foundation of mutual respect, not on the shifting sands of deceit and insecurity. I took a breath, the same kind of centering breath I took at the pottery wheel. I think that sounds, I searched for the right word, structurally sound. His smile was like the sunrise through the warehouse window he'd designed, warm, hopeful, and full of light. The art exhibit was a quiet earthquake. It wasn't just the buildings on display, their steel skeletons and glass skins exposed in bold, artistic defiance. It was the company. Walking through the hushed, gallery-white halls with Liam felt both terrifyingly intimate and as easy as breathing. We didn't talk much at first, both of us absorbing the monumental structures captured in dramatic photographs and intricate cross-section models. But when we did, it was a continuous, flowing conversation. He'd point to a cantilevered section of a skyscraper. "See how they've managed the sheer stress at that junction. It's like a ballet." And I'd reply, "It's the same principle as a cantilevered chair, just on a slightly more ambitious scale." He'd laugh, a low, warm sound that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor. Slightly, he asked me about my work, not just the Larson project, but my philosophy. What kind of spaces did I believe in? What did I think a home should be? Ethan had never asked me that. His questions about my work were always logistical. Will you be late? Or how much is the bonus? Liam's questions sought the blueprint of my soul. In return, he told me about growing up with a contractor father, spending summers on job sites, learning that a structure was only as strong as the integrity of the people building it. My dad used to say, "You can hide a shoddy pipe behind a drywall, but eventually it will leak and ruin the whole house. Same with lies." The statement hung in the air between us, weighted with an unspoken understanding. He seemed to sense he was treading near a fault line. We ended up at a small cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and the rich, bitter scent of properly roasted coffee. He stirred his black coffee and said, "So, the pottery. It's a long way from drafting tables." I looked at my hands, curled around the warm mug. They were clean now, but I could still feel the ghost of the clay. I needed to make something with my hands that didn't require a calculator. Something that could be imperfect. I hesitated, then added, "My life fell apart a little while ago. The pottery feels like starting from the ground up, with mud." He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't look away in awkwardness. He simply nodded, his gaze steady and accepting. Mud is a good place to start. It's the original building material. Everything goes back to the earth, eventually. It was the most profound permission to be broken I had ever received. I drove home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. There was no frantic passion, no dizzying infatuation. Instead, a deep, solid sense of calm had settled in my bones. It was the feeling of a load-bearing wall finally being properly supported. That feeling evaporated the moment I turned onto my street. Ethan's car, a familiar, hated silver sedan, was parked in my driveway. My driveway. He was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. The lightness in my chest turned to lead. I pulled up to the curb, killing the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching him through the windshield. He was still handsome, in a sharp, polished way that now seemed superficial. The sight of him no longer sparked longing. It ignited a cold, defensive fury. I got out of the car slowly, my keys clenched in my fist. "You changed the locks," he said by way of greeting, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I did," I replied, my tone neutral. "It's my house." "Our house, Amelia," he shot back, pushing off the car and taking a step toward me. "We are still married. You can't just lock me out of my own home." "You lost the right to call this your home when you flinched away from my touch in therapy," I said, the words coming out icy and precise. "This is the consequence of your actions, Ethan. You don't get to be angry about the fallout." His composure cracked. This is not a consequence, this is a nuclear war. Painting over everything, changing the locks, ignoring my calls. "We have children, Amelia. We have a life." "We had a life," I corrected him, my voice rising. "You were the one who decided to build a secret annex with your personal trainer. Did you think there would be no structural damage? That the whole thing wouldn't come crashing down? It was a mistake," he yelled, throwing his hands up. "A stupid, fucking mistake. Don't you think I regret it? Don't you think I want to fix this?" "You don't get to fix this," I shouted back, the dam of my control finally breaking. All the white paint calm, all the pottery centering serenity, vanished, replaced by a raw, tectonic rage. "You don't get to decide when the demolition is over. I'm the one standing in the rubble, Ethan, me. And I will be the one to decide what gets built in its place. Not you." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, chests heaving, two architects of our own misery staring at the wreckage between us. His expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculating. "I see," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing calm. "So this is how it's going to be. You're going to play the victim and tear everything down." "I'm not playing anything. I'm surviving." "Well, survive this," he hissed, taking another step closer. "If you think you can freeze me out of my assets and my children's lives, you are sorely mistaken. I'll see you in court, Amelia. I will fight you for this house, for the kids, for every last cent. I'll make sure you regret this." The threat landed like a physical blow, a court battle. Lawyers, using our children as pawns. It was my deepest fear, the worst-case scenario made real. The cold fear must have shown on my face because a smug, ugly satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't," I whispered. "Try me." He turned, got into his car, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and he sped away, leaving me standing on the curb, trembling, the ghost of his legal threat clinging to me like a toxic vapor. I stumbled into the house, the stark white walls now feeling accusing rather than cleansing. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was the silence before a storm. He was going to fight me. He was going to try and break me financially, emotionally, through our children. I walked to my pottery studio, a corner of the garage I'd claimed as my own. My latest piece, a taller, more ambitious vase, was waiting on the wheel, leather-hard and ready for trimming. It was the most balanced thing I had made yet. I looked at it, then at my hands. I thought of Liam's father's words about shoddy pipes and lies. Ethan's threat was a leak, trying to ruin my new foundation. I thought of the centered clay, of the balance between control and surrender. I sat down at the wheel. I didn't turn it on. I just picked up my trimming tool, a sharp, hooked blade, and I began to carve. I carved the fear into the clay. I carved the anger. I carved the image of Ethan's smug, victorious face. I gouged deep, spiraling grooves, not randomly, but with intent. I was not destroying the vase. I was inscribing my struggle onto it. I was turning the threat into texture, the fear into form. When I was done, the vase was no longer a simple, smooth vessel. It was complex, scarred, deeply patterned. It was stronger for having been carved into. It was more beautiful because it had acknowledged the fight. I set the tool down, my hands steady. The tremor was gone. He wanted a war? Fine. I was an architect. I was a potter. I was a mother. I was built for this. Let him come with his lawyers and his threats. I had just begun to build, and my foundation was solid rock. The lawyer's office was a study in muted tones. Gray carpets, beige walls, a large mahogany desk that felt more like a barrier than a piece of furniture. It smelled of lemon polish and anxiety. My attorney, a sharp, unflappable woman named Patricia, sat beside me, her pen poised over a legal pad. Across from us was Ethan, flanked by his own counsel, a man with a too-tan complexion and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was the first formal skirmish. Not about the children yet, thank God, but about the finances, the temporary support, the first move in the war he had promised. My client, Ethan's lawyer began, his voice slick as oil, has been displaced from his primary residence, a property in which he has significant financial and emotional equity. He is currently incurring substantial hotel costs. We are seeking a temporary order for spousal support from Miss Miller, as well as exclusive use of the family home pending the dissolution. The air left my lungs. He was seeking support from me. The audacity was a physical slap. Patricia didn't flinch. Your client, she said, her voice dry and cool as a desert wind, is a partner at a prestigious financial firm. My client is an architect, whose income, while substantial, is not on par with his. Furthermore, the emotional equity you speak of was severely devalued by his extramarital affair, which we are prepared to document. We will be counterfiling for temporary support from Mr. Miller to maintain the children's standard of living in their primary home. The back and forth was a brutal, clinical dissection of our life together. Every vacation, every investment, every piece of furniture became a data point in a cold equation. Ethan argued that my recent erratic behavior, the painting, the pottery, was evidence of instability. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, nails digging into my palms. I was a blueprint under a harsh, unforgiving light, every flaw magnified. It was exhausting. It was demeaning. And through it all, Ethan barely looked at me. When he did, his gaze was a stranger's, cold, strategic, and utterly devoid of the history we shared. I left 2 hours later, feeling hollowed out and scraped raw. The white walls of my house, my sanctuary, offered no comfort that night. They felt like the walls of a hospital room, sterile and lonely. The silence was a vacuum, and into it rushed every fear, every threat his lawyer had uttered. The next day was my scheduled pottery class. I almost didn't go. The thought of the calm, centered studio felt like a cruel joke. How could I center clay when my entire life was being pulled apart at the seams? But a stubborn, deeper instinct pushed me out the door. It was the same instinct that had made me pick up the paint roller. Sage took one look at me as I walked in and didn't ask any questions. She just nodded toward my wheel. Today's assignment was handles. Pulling graceful, sturdy handles from a lump of clay and attaching them to a cup. It was a task of connection, of creating something functional and whole from separate pieces. The irony was almost too much to bear. My first attempts were pathetic. The clay ropes were too thin, too thick, they broke, they sagged. They refused to bond with the body of the cup, slumping off like dead things. My frustration mounted, a hot, sharp pressure behind my eyes. This was a stupid, pointless hobby. It wouldn't stop Ethan's lawyer. It wouldn't protect my children. It wouldn't pay my legal bills. I was on the verge of throwing the whole mess against the wall when Sage knelt beside me. Your attachment is too wet, she said quietly, not touching my work. And you're trying to smudge it on. You have to score the surface. Create a roughness for the new clay to grip onto. Then you use slip, liquid clay as a glue, but the key is pressure. Consistent, firm pressure. You have to hold it there, support it, until you feel the bond begin to set. If you let go too soon, it will always fall off. Score the surface, create a roughness, hold it until the bond sets. The words sliced through my self-pity. This wasn't just about pottery, this was about everything. My life had been scored, deeply and painfully. The old, smooth surface was gone. Now I was in the process of attaching new things, new strength, new independence, new trust, and it required patience and consistent pressure. I couldn't expect it to hold instantly. I took a shuddering breath. I scored the surface of my cup. I applied the slip. I pulled a new handle, focusing not on perfection, but on strength, and I pressed it into place, my fingers holding it with a steady, unwavering pressure. I held it long after my arm ached. I held it until the clay began to stiffen, and I knew, with a deep, cellular certainty, that the bond would hold. It was ugly, it was lopsided, but it was attached, it was functional, it was mine. A week later, the first real test of my new, rough-edged strength arrived. It was Liam. He'd texted, asking if he could drop by with a project. My heart hammered against my ribs. The lawyer's warnings about appearances and conduct echoed in my head. But the memory of the handle, of the bond that held, was stronger. When I opened the door, he was standing there, holding a large, flat-pack cardboard box and a bag from a hardware store. He looked nervous. "Hi," he said, offering a tentative smile. I hope this isn't weird. I was at the store and saw this. It's a bookshelf. And I know you said you were redecorating, and I thought, well, I'm good with my hands. And it's always better to build these things with two people. A lot less swearing." I looked from his hopeful face to the box. It was a simple, modern bookshelf. The kind of thing Ethan would have hired someone to assemble. The kind of thing Liam offered to build with me in the middle of my chaos. My first instinct was to say no, to protect myself, to avoid the complication. But I heard Sage's voice, "Hold it until the bond sets." "Okay," I said, my voice a little breathless. "But I'm warning you, my instructional folding skills are tragically linked to my architecture training. I might overcomplicate it." His smile widened. "I can handle complicated." We spread the pieces, and the comically small Allen wrench on the living room floor. The children, curious, drifted in and out. Lily, my 8-year-old, sat cross-legged, handing Liam screws with a solemn gravity. Noah, my 5-year-old, mostly rolled on the floor and tried to steal the wooden dowels. It was chaos. The instructions were hieroglyphics. At one point, we realized we'd attached a side panel backwards and had to dismantle half of it. Liam, true to his word, didn't swear. He just laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the white-walled room with warmth for the first time. "See," he said, holding two pieces together while I struggled to thread a bolt. "It's all about the foundation. If this part is crooked, the whole thing will be wobbly." I looked at his hands, steady and sure, then at mine, fumbling with the bolt. I thought of the legal battle, of the fear, of the sheer effort of holding myself together. "What if the foundation is damaged?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He didn't look up from his task. His focus was absolute. "Then you reinforce it," he said simply. "You find the weak points and you add support. You don't throw the whole structure away. You make it stronger than it was before." Tears pricked my eyes. I quickly blinked them away. In that moment, he wasn't just talking about a bookshelf. He was acknowledging my broken foundation and, without pity or pressure, stating that it could be fixed, that I was worth reinforcing. We finally got the last shelf in place. It stood in the corner of my living room, straight and tall and simple. It wasn't a dramatic, paint-splattered transformation, but it was a tangible change. A new structure in the blank white space. A piece built not by one person, but through collaboration, patience, and a few shared laughs over misplaced screws. Lily stood back, assessing it critically. "I like it," she declared. "It's not as fancy as the old one, but it's nicer." Noah, having lost interest in the dowels, came and wrapped his arms around my leg. "Is Liam your new friend, Mommy?" I looked at Liam, who was gathering up the cardboard debris, his presence calm and solid in the center of my storm. I looked at the bookshelf, a testament to building something good from a box of scattered parts. I scooped Noah up. "Yes, sweetie," I said, my voice clear and sure. "He's a very good friend." It was a small admission, but it felt like bolting a major support beam into place. The legal war was far from over. The pain was still a fresh wound. But in that moment, with the scent of sawdust in the air and my children safe nearby, I felt the first unshakable certainty that my new foundation would hold. The bookshelf stood as a silent sentinel in the living room, a symbol of something new and collaboratively built. But in the days that followed, a strange restlessness took root in me. Liam's presence had been a balm, a reassurance that not all structures were fragile. Yet, a part of me, the part that had been so thoroughly dismantled, whispered a caution. Leaning on him felt perilously close to needing him, and needing anyone felt like a vulnerability I could no longer afford. My recovery, my rebuild, had to be my own. This restlessness manifested in my pottery. The pieces I threw were technically better, but they felt sterile, perfectly centered, symmetrical, and utterly soulless. They were walls, not vessels. Sage observed my frustration one evening. "You're trying to build a fortress, Amelia," she said, running a finger along the flawless, unadorned rim of a bowl. "There's no breath in it, no vulnerability. The beauty is in the wobble, remember. The human fingerprint. The human fingerprint." My life had become a series of controlled, defensive actions, legal filings, carefully worded texts to Ethan, measured interactions with Liam. I had painted my walls white and built a perfectly centered, emotionally barren life. I was an architect designing a prison for one. The idea came to me in the middle of the night, a sudden, clear imperative. A solo trip. Not the dramatic, impulsive flight to Iceland I'd once fantasized about, but something closer, more intentional. I remembered a house. The Ernest J. Mellinger House, a lesser-known Frank Lloyd Wright masterpiece nestled in a forest in Ohio, a 4-hour drive away. It was a pilgrimage I'd always meant to make with Ethan, but he'd always dismissed it as a long drive to look at an old house. Now, it would be my drive, my house. I told the kids I was going on a mommy adventure. I packed a small bag, a change of clothes, my thickest sketchbook, a set of charcoal pencils, and a thermos of coffee. I didn't tell Liam. This was not his to fix or to share. This was mine. The drive was a form of meditation. The relentless flatness of the Ohio Turnpike gave way to rolling hills, then to the dense, green canopy of the Appalachian foothills. With every mile, the tight knot in my chest began to loosen. There was no one to talk to, no one to manage. There was only the road, the changing landscape, and the music I chose for myself. The Mellinger house appeared as if from a dream, a low-slung symphony of cantilevered concrete and warm, Cherokee red brick, nestled into the hillside as if it had grown there. It was organic. It was imperfect. It was breathtaking. I took the tour, listening to the docent explain Wright's philosophy of organic architecture, how the house was designed to blend with its environment, not dominate it, how the imperfect, textured materials were chosen for their warmth and humanity. It was the antithesis of everything my life with Ethan had been, a performance of polished perfection. When the tour ended, I found a spot on a flat outcrop of rock that looked back at the house, a perfect, framed view. I opened my sketchbook. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the geometric forms. I picked up a charcoal pencil, and I froze. My hand, so sure on a drafting table, hovered over the page. I was trying to draw the lines perfectly, to capture the precise angles, to render it with photographic accuracy. I was trying to command it. The result was stiff, lifeless. A technical drawing, not a piece of art. Frustrated, I nearly slammed the book shut. But then the wind rustled through the leaves, and a bird called out, and I looked at the house again. I saw the way the light caressed the rough texture of the brick, how a vine crept up one corner, softening a hard edge. I saw its wobble. I put the charcoal pencil down. I picked up a softer, thicker stick of graphite. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathed in the scent of damp earth and pine, and when I opened them, I didn't look at the house as an architect. I looked at it as a woman who was broken and rebuilding. I started to draw. Not the lines, but the light. Not the form, but the feeling. My hand moved in broad, sweeping strokes, capturing the shadow the house cast, the weight of it on the land, the grace of its defiance against gravity. I smudged the graphite with my thumb to show the roughness of the brick. I let my lines wander, break, and reform. I allowed for imperfection. I lost track of time. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. My sketch was a mess. It was wild. It was full of energy and emotion and mistakes. It was, without a doubt, the most honest piece of art I had ever created. As I sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the forest, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I was alone, truly, completely alone. And for the first time, the aloneness didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. It felt like strength. I had provided this for myself. I had driven myself here, fed my own soul, and created something from a place of raw, unvarnished truth. I didn't need a man to validate this moment. I didn't need a partner to complete it. I was whole here on this rock, with my messy sketch and my quiet heart. The drive back the next day was different. The world seemed sharper, more vivid. I felt integrated. Like the Mellinger house, I was learning to be a part of my environment, not fighting against it. My cracks, my flaws, my wobbles, they weren't weaknesses to be hidden. They were what made me unique. They were what gave my structure its character. When I walked back into my white-walled house, it didn't feel sterile anymore. It felt like a canvas. My canvas. I propped the wild, imperfect sketch of the Mellinger house on the mantel, next to the lopsided pottery vase. They were bookends of my rebirth, one from clay, one from charcoal, both born from surrender. Later that night, Liam texted. "How was your adventure?" I looked at the sketch, then at my hands, still faintly smudged with graphite. I smiled. "It was structurally sound," I typed back, "and beautifully imperfect." For the first time, I believed it, not just about the trip, but about myself. The foundation was set, the walls were going up, and they were mine. The courthouse hallway was a river of anxious humanity, flowing under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. I stood with Patricia, my palms damp, my stomach a tight knot of dread. This was the first significant hearing, a temporary orders hearing that would set the financial and custodial tone for the entire divorce. Ethan was already there, across the hall, with his lawyer. He looked polished, confident, and he pointedly avoided my gaze. "Remember," Patricia murmured, her voice a low, steady anchor. "He's going to try to paint you as unstable. The painting, the pottery, your solo trip, he'll use it all. Don't take the bait. Stay calm. Facts are our foundation." Facts. The fact was that he had cheated. The fact was that I was the children's primary caregiver. The fact was that I was a stable, successful professional. But in the law, facts could be twisted into strange new shapes. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected, all dark wood and solemnity. The judge, a woman with a stern face and sharp eyes, presided. The air was cold and smelled of old paper and floor wax. Ethan's lawyer went first. He was slick, weaving a narrative of a dedicated father and husband unjustly exiled from his home by a wife having a late-life crisis. He spoke of my radical redecoration as an erasure of our shared history, my pottery classes as a frivolous distraction from my family duties, and my trip to Ohio as evidence of irresponsible, unpredictable behavior. "Your Honor," he said, his voice oozing false concern, "we are simply asking for a fair and equal division of time with the children. My client misses his son and daughter desperately. He is willing to provide Miss Miller with support, but we must also consider the destabilizing environment she is currently creating." My nails dug deeper into my palms. Destabilizing environment. I was creating a home free of lies, and I was the destabilizing one. Then it was Patricia's turn. She was a master. She didn't plead. She presented. She entered into evidence Ethan's credit card statements, highlighting charges for a hotel on nights he claimed to be at the gym, and a receipt for a piece of jewelry from a boutique I'd never heard of. She called him to the stand. Under her precise questioning, Ethan squirmed. He admitted to the mistake with the personal trainer but tried to minimize it. When Patricia pressed him on the duration and the lies, his polished facade cracked. He became defensive, arrogant. "And is it true, Mr. Miller," Patricia asked, her tone deceptively mild, "that you threatened to see Miss Miller in court and make her regret this during a confrontation at her home?" Ethan's eyes flickered to me, a flash of pure venom. I was upset. She had changed the locks on our marital home. "So, you threatened her with protracted litigation because you were upset about the locks?" Patricia clarified. "It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact." The judge's pen scratched across her notepad. The sound was deafening. When it was my turn, I took the stand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. Patricia guided me gently through my testimony, my commitment to my children, my stable career, my attempts to create a peaceful, honest home for them amid the chaos he had created. Then Ethan's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He approached with a predatory smile. "Miss Miller, this peaceful, honest home you speak of, you painted over every wall in the house, is that correct?" In a matter of days, yes. A rather impulsive act, wouldn't you say, erasing 12 years of history? I took a breath, picturing the centered clay. It was not impulsive, it was intentional. I was creating a clean space for my children and myself. An architect understands the importance of a sound structure. The previous decor was part of a structure built on deception. I was shoring up the foundations. The lawyer blinked, thrown off by my clinical analogy. He changed tack. "And you've taken up pottery and taken solo trips, leaving your children behind?" "My children were safe with my sister. As for pottery," I said, my voice gaining strength, "it has taught me patience, resilience, and the beauty of creating something new from raw materials. It has been a therapeutic and stabilizing force in my life. I am learning to build again, counselor, from the ground up." I looked directly at the judge. "I am not erasing history, I am learning from it. And I am building a future for my children based on honesty, not on the shaky ground of infidelity and threats." The lawyer had a few more barbs, but the wind had left his sails. My calm, measured responses had deflected his attempts to paint me as hysterical or unstable. The judge called for a short recess before her ruling. The 20 minutes in the hallway felt like 20 years. Ethan and his lawyer huddled, speaking in low, urgent tones. Patricia simply gave me a small, confident nod. We reconvened. The judge adjusted her glasses and began to speak. She granted me exclusive use of the marital home, citing the need for stability for the children. She set a temporary child support order that was fair and a visitation schedule for Ethan that was structured and specific, requiring him to communicate through a parenting app. She dismissed his claims about my instability, noting that creative pursuits and self-care were not, in fact, evidence of parental unfitness. It was a victory, a real, tangible, court-ordered victory. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt shocking in its brightness. Ethan brushed past me without a word, his anger a physical force. But I didn't care. I felt light, as if I had been carrying a bag of stones for months and could finally set it down. Patricia squeezed my arm. "You were magnificent in there. You turned his evidence against him. He thought your creativity was a weakness. You showed them it was your strength." I drove home, the legal knot in my stomach finally loosened. When I walked in, the house felt different. It wasn't just a white canvas anymore. It was a protected space. A sanctioned sanctuary. That evening, when Liam texted, I didn't just text back, I called him. "I won," I said, the words feeling foreign and wonderful on my tongue. "I never had a doubt," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "What are you and the kids doing this weekend?" The question was simple, but it felt monumental. It was an invitation into a life that was no longer defined by a court battle, but by the possibility of what came next. "We're building a blanket fort," I said, a genuine laugh bubbling up. "A massive, structurally unsound, magnificent blanket fort, and we could use a good engineer." His warm laughter was the final, solid brick laid in the foundation of that day. The hearing was over. The fight was far from finished, but the biggest load had been borne and the structure had held. Now it was time to live in it. The blanket fort was a catastrophe of epic proportions. It was a glorious, sprawling mess of every sheet, blanket, and duvet we owned, draped over chairs, couches, and the new, sturdy bookshelf, held together with an excessive amount of clothespins and hopeless optimism. Lily, my little engineer, was inside, directing operations with the fervor of a general, while Noah, my agent of chaos, would periodically launch himself against the fabric walls, causing the entire structure to shudder and sag. I was on my knees, trying to secure a slipping bedsheet to the leg of the dining table when the doorbell rang. My heart did a little flip, part anticipation, part residual anxiety. I crawled out from under the precarious canopy and smoothed down my hair, which was undoubtedly a mess. Liam stood on the porch, holding a paper bag from a local bakery and a small, wrapped parcel. He was wearing jeans and a soft-looking flannel shirt, and his smile was easy, genuine. "Come in," I said, stepping back. "Welcome to Fort Chaos." He stepped inside and stopped, taking in the magnificent disaster in my living room. A slow grin spread across his face. "This is the best thing I've ever seen. Mommy, we need more pillows," Lily's voice commanded from within the fabric depths. "You heard the foreman," Liam said, his eyes twinkling. He set the bakery bag and the parcel on the kitchen counter and immediately grabbed 2 cushions from the sofa, dropping to his hands and knees to crawl inside. I followed him in. The interior was a cocoon of soft light and whispered giggles. Liam didn't try to take over or fix the sagging roof. He just found a spot, leaned against a pillow fort wall, and said, "This is a superior architectural design. Excellent use of negative space." Lily beamed at him. For the next hour, we just existed. We told silly stories. We ate the pastries from the bag, getting powdered sugar everywhere. We laughed when Noah, in a fit of excitement, brought the entire east wing down upon us in a heap of soft cotton and childish giggles. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was the most relaxed I had felt in a year. Later, after the children were tucked into their actual, non-blanket beds, exhausted and happy, Liam and I sat on the floor amidst the wreckage of the fort, leaning against the sofa. "That parcel is for you," he said, nodding toward the kitchen counter. "Well, for you and the kids, I suppose." Curious, I retrieved it. It was flat and rectangular. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautiful, custom-cut piece of oak, sanded to a smooth finish. Etched into the wood by a laser was a simple, elegant line drawing of a bookshelf. Not the one we built, but a stylized, perfect version of it. And below the drawing in a clean font were the words, "The Miller Library. Established year 1. Tears sprang to my eyes, sudden and hot. He hadn't given me flowers or jewelry. He had given me a plaque for our bookshelf. He had commemorated something we built together. He had seen the significance in the mundane, messy, beautiful act of creating something for our home. "Liam," I whispered, my voice thick. It's perfect." "It's just a thing," he said softly, but his eyes were watching me, reading the emotion on my face with that unnerving perception of his. "It's not," I said, clutching the plaque to my chest. "It's a cornerstone." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unspoken settling around us. The divorce was still a grinding reality. The hurt was still a fresh bruise. But this here was something new, something real. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words leaving me in a rush. It was the first time I'd said it out loud to anyone, including myself. "I'm scared that I'm building something new on a foundation that's still cracked. I'm scared that my judgment is broken, that I can't trust myself to know what's real." Liam listened, his gaze steady and patient. He didn't try to reassure me with empty promises. He didn't tell me not to be scared. "My dad also used to say that the strongest repairs are often the ones you can't see," he said after a moment. The steel rods drilled deep into cracked concrete. The new footings poured underneath an old house. The strength is in the reinforcement, not in pretending the crack was never there. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was electric and soothing all at once. "Your foundation isn't broken, Amelia. It's been reinforced. With everything you've survived, everything you've built for yourself and your kids, it's stronger now than it ever was before. And your judgment, it brought you here, to this fort. To this moment, that seems pretty sound to me." His words didn't erase the fear, but they laid a steel rod right through the heart of it. He wasn't asking me to ignore my past or my pain. He was asking me to see it as a source of strength. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his hands, the quiet integrity that seemed to be the very core of him. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it all, the attraction, the hope, the terrifying, thrilling possibility of a future with this man. I leaned forward. It was a small movement, but it felt like the most significant decision I had made since picking up the paint roller. I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss born of loneliness. It wasn't a reckless kiss born of rebellion. It was a slow, deliberate, and deeply felt kiss. A kiss of choice. A kiss of trust. It was the final, conscious act of attaching myself to something new, something good. I felt his surprise for a fraction of a second, and then his arms came around me, pulling me closer, his response as sure and steady as I knew him to be. When we finally pulled apart, the world had shifted on its axis. The blanket fort was still a wreck around us. The legal documents were still in a folder on my desk. The future was still uncertain, but I was no longer scared. I was reinforced. "Stay," I whispered, my forehead resting against his. He smiled, a real, full, breathtaking smile. "The foreman might have opinions on that." I laughed, the sound light and free. "The foreman is asleep, and the structural engineer has just given his final approval." He kissed me again, and in that kiss I felt the final piece of my new foundation lock into place. It was strong, it was true, and it was built to last. The first official custody exchange was set for a neutral location, the parking lot of the children's favorite playground. Patricia had advised it. "Public places keep things civil," she'd said. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. I stood by my car, the autumn wind whipping my hair around my face. The playground was a riot of primary colors against the gray sky, the cheerful squeals of children, a stark contrast to the leaden weight in my stomach. Lily and Noah were in the backseat, unusually quiet. They sensed the tension, kids always do. Ethan's silver sedan pulled in beside me. He got out, not looking at me, his focus entirely on the children. He opened the back door, his voice artificially bright. "Hey, guys, ready for our weekend?" The kids scrambled out, a flurry of backpacks and mixed emotions. Lily gave me a tight hug. "Bye, Mommy." "Bye, sweetie." "Have fun." I kissed the top of her head, my heart aching. Noah, less aware, just yelled bye and ran towards his father. Ethan shepherded them into his car, then finally turned to me. The polite facade dropped. His eyes were cold. "I got the paperwork for the financial disclosure," he said, his voice low and sharp. "You're claiming a lot of business expenses for your little pottery hobby." It was a petty opening gambit designed to rattle me. The pottery classes were a minuscule line item. I took a breath, feeling the reinforced steel of my new foundation hold firm. "It's a legitimate personal development expense, noted as such. Your lawyer can review it," I replied, my tone even. He took a step closer, his presence an aggressive wall. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Redecorating, building bookshelves, playing house with your new friend." He spat the last word. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about him?" A cold trickle of fear ran down my spine. He'd been watching, or having me watched. "My personal life is none of your business, Ethan." "It is when it affects my children," he snapped, his voice rising. "I don't want some strange man around my kids. I'll be filing a motion for restrictions. This is exactly the kind of instability I was talking about." The threat was clear. He was going to use Liam against me. He was going to try and pollute this one pure good thing in my life. The old Amelia would have crumbled. She would have pleaded, bargained, tried to de-escalate. But the old Amelia was gone. I stood my ground, my gaze steady. "His name is Liam. He is a kind, stable man who treats me and the children with respect. You do not get to dictate my life anymore. You forfeited that right when you chose your personal trainer over your family." His face flushed with anger. "You are still my wife. Legally, not in any way that matters." I took a step forward myself, my own anger, long suppressed and white-hot, finally rising to the surface. "You don't get to cheat, lie, threaten me, and then play the wounded husband. You don't get to destroy the foundation of our family and then complain about the new architecture. The instability here is a direct result of your actions. Own it." He stared at me, stunned into silence. I had never spoken to him like this. I had never stood up to him with such unshakable certainty. The power dynamic, for so long tilted in his favor, had just seismically shifted. "You have the children for 48 hours, I continued, my voice cold and precise. "I expect them to be returned to me, on time, happy and healthy. Any further communication can go through our lawyers or the parenting app as the judge ordered. Are we clear?" His jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to say so much more, to lash out, to break me down again. But he couldn't. The flinch was mine now. He was the one off balance. "Crystal," he finally gritted out. He turned and got into his car, slamming the door. I stood there, watching him drive away, my children in the backseat. The fear was still there, a cold echo, but it was overshadowed by a roaring, triumphant certainty. I had faced him down. I had held my line. I had not just survived the pressure test, I had passed it. I got into my own car, my hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. The empty car seats in the back felt like a physical void. The silence was immense. For the first time in 12 years, I was completely, utterly alone for a weekend. I drove home, the victory feeling hollowed out by the absence of my children. The white walls of the house seemed to mock me. The silence was a presence. I walked from room to room, the emptiness amplifying every doubt. Had I been too harsh? Had I made things worse for the kids? I ended up in the garage at my pottery wheel. The lump of clay was cold and unyielding. I wet it, my movements mechanical. I started the wheel, the hum familiar and soothing. I tried to center the clay, but my hands were shaking. It wobbled, a messy, uncontrolled spiral. Tears of frustration and loneliness welled in my eyes. The brave face I'd shown Ethan crumbled. I was so tired of being strong. I was so tired of building. I let my hands fall from the clay, letting it spin into a useless, formless lump. I put my head in my hands and cried, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my reinforced foundation. I cried for the lost years, for the broken trust, for the terrifying responsibility of being the stable one for my children. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided. I looked at the ruined clay on the wheel, a formless lump, again, but I wasn't the same woman I was the first time I'd failed to center clay. I knew what to do. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I stopped the wheel. I scooped up the messy, wet clay and I started again. I needed it, wedging out the air bubbles, the frustration, the fear. I was not starting from scratch. I was reclaiming the material. I was reinforcing it. I put the new, wedged ball of clay back on the wheel. I started the spin. My hands, now steady, found their place. I didn't force it. I guided it. I breathed with it. And it centered. Perfectly. A smooth, spinning dome of potential. I didn't try to make a vase or a bowl. I just centered it. And that was enough. My phone buzzed. It was Liam. How did it go? I looked at the perfectly centered clay, then at my clean, quiet, empty house. I thought of Ethan's furious, defeated face. I thought of my children's trusting hugs. I typed back, my fingers sure and calm. It was hard, but the structure held. And for the first time, I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, that it would always hold. Not because of Liam, not in spite of Ethan, but because of me. I was the architect, I was the potter, I was the foundation, and I was unshakable. The centered clay from my night of tears dried into a solid, humble lump. I didn't throw it. I kept it on my studio shelf, a reminder that even in the deepest moments of doubt, the core of me could find its balance. The weekend without the children was a long, echoing expanse, but I filled it with small, deliberate acts of self-preservation. I cleaned, I read, I went for a long, solitary walk. I did not fall apart. When Sunday evening came, I was waiting in the playground parking lot again, my nerves a tight coil. Ethan's car pulled in. The kids tumbled out, their energy a welcome shockwave in the quiet I'd cultivated. "Mommy, Daddy let us have ice cream for dinner," Noah announced, his face smeared with chocolate. Lily, ever the diplomat, shot her brother a look. "It was after dinner, Noah." She turned to me, her expression more complex. "We had pizza." I hugged them both fiercely, inhaling the scents of playground mulch and Ethan's car. "I missed you both so much." I looked over their heads at Ethan, who was standing by his car door. "Thank you for bringing them back," I said, my voice carefully neutral. He gave a curt nod, his eyes flicking from me to the kids and back. There was a tension there, but it was quieter now, a cold war rather than a hot battle. He got in his car and drove away without another word. As we drove home, the car filled with their chatter, a chaotic symphony that made my heart swell. They were okay. We were okay. Later, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me, her big eyes serious in the dim light. "Mommy," she asked, "is Liam going to be your new daddy?" The question, so blunt and innocent, stole my breath. I sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair. "No, sweetie, he's my friend. You don't ever have to call him daddy if you don't want to. That's a very special word." She considered this. "But he's nice. He built the bookshelf. And he laughs at my jokes." My heart melted. "Yes, he is very nice, and he does think you're very funny." The following weekend, the next test presented itself. The Larson project was nearly complete, and Liam and I had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of working together. One Saturday, he came over, not with blueprints, but with another flat-pack box. This one was smaller, a child's art table with 2 little stools. "I was thinking," he said, a hint of shyness in his demeanor I hadn't seen before. Noah is always drawing on the floor, and Lily mentioned wanting her own desk. I thought maybe I could help them build it, if that's okay with you. This was different from the bookshelf. The bookshelf was for the house. This was for them. For my children, this was integration. My pulse quickened. This was a load-bearing request of an entirely new kind. I looked at his hopeful, earnest face. I thought of Lily's words, "He's nice." I thought of my own reinforced foundation. I had to trust it. "Okay," I said, my voice soft. "Let's build it with them." We assembled the table in the living room, but this time, Lily and Noah were not bystanders. They were foremen and primary laborers. Liam was a natural. He didn't take over. He handed Noah the important job of holding the screws. He showed Lily how to align the pre-drilled holes and let her turn the Allen wrench until her little hands got tired. "See, Lily," he said, steadying the table leg she was working on. "It's all about the first turn. You have to get it started straight or the whole thing gets wobbly, just like your mom's pottery." I watched from the kitchen, making lunch, my heart performing a slow, expansive ache. This was it, the terrifying, beautiful mess of blending lives. There was noise. There was a moment of frustration when a screw rolled under the sofa. There was a small paint smudge on the new white wall from where Noah had leaned a freshly painted stool a little too soon. But there was also laughter. There was Liam on his knees, patiently helping Noah decipher the pictorial instructions. There was Lily, beaming with pride at a stool she had mostly built herself. When the table and stools were finally assembled, standing proudly in the corner of the living room, the kids immediately set to work, covering it with paper and an explosion of crayons. Liam stood beside me watching them. "Thank you," I whispered, my shoulder brushing his arm. "Thank you for letting me," he replied. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, surrounded by the evidence of our shared day, crayon wrappers, a stray screw, the new table covered in vibrant, wobbly drawings, Liam and I sat on the sofa. It wasn't the passionate intensity of our first kiss, but something deeper, more settled. He told me about his own past, a long-term relationship that had ended not with a bang, but a slow, quiet fizzle of disinterest. "We were a good design on paper," he said, but the emotional load-bearing walls were never there. It just collapsed under the weight of everyday life. I told him more about my marriage to Ethan, not just the infidelity, but the slow erosion of respect, the feeling of being an accessory in my own life. "It's like you were living in a house designed by someone else," he mused, his hand finding mine. "All the wrong angles, rooms that didn't fit how you lived." "Yes," I said, the truth of it resonating deeply. "Exactly that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. "You know," he said, his voice quiet in the dim room, "I'm not trying to be their father. I know I can't replace that. But I'd like to be, I don't know, a good, solid porch. Somewhere they feel safe and welcome, a part of the structure, but with the freedom to come and go." Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they were pure, unadulterated tears of relief. He understood. He saw the blueprint of this complex, fragile new family we were tentatively sketching, and he respected its parameters. The integration wasn't a dramatic event. It was a Saturday. It was a child's art table. It was a man humble enough to want to be a porch. It was the final, quiet assurance that the new wings I was adding to my life were not just aesthetically pleasing, but structurally sound, built on a foundation of mutual respect, patience, and a love that was beginning to feel as steady and reliable as the earth itself. The key was cold and heavy in my palm, a solid brass promise. It was cut for a lock I had never seen, on a door I had never opened. Our door. "Ready?" Liam asked, his hand warm on the small of my back. We stood on the stoop of a brownstone in a historic district of the city, a world away from the suburban sprawl of my old life with Ethan. The kids were bouncing with impatient energy, a duffel bag full of their most precious belongings, a worn stuffed rabbit, a stack of well-loved books, Lily's entire rock collection, at their feet. "Ready?" I said, and slid the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a satisfying, solid clunk. We pushed the door open together. The space was empty, all polished hardwood floors and high ceilings, flooded with the soft, late afternoon light that streamed through large, original windows. It smelled of citrus-scented cleaner and potential, our potential. "Whoa," Noah whispered, his voice echoing in the vast, unfurnished living room. "It's huge." It's ours, Lily corrected him, her voice filled with a solemn awe. She walked to the center of the room and spun in a slow circle, her arms outstretched as if to hug the entire space. I felt Liam's hand find mine, his fingers lacing through my own. We stood there on the threshold of our new life, watching our children claim it. This wasn't a house I had painted white to erase a past. This was a home we were going to build together, from the ground up, with every scratch on the floor and smudge on the wall telling our story. The move itself was a controlled chaos that felt nothing like the frantic, angry purge of my previous life. It was a symphony of shared effort. David from my firm showed up with a truck and his booming laugh. Liam's brother, a contractor, helped with the heavy furniture. Even Sage from the pottery studio dropped by with a housewarming gift, a set of beautifully glazed, mismatched mugs, each with its own unique wobble. For the coffee that will fuel the unpacking, she'd said with a wink. As the sun set, the chaos subsided. Boxes were stacked in corners, the sofa was positioned, and the beds were assembled. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by towers of cardboard, eating from paper plates. The Miller Library plaque was already hung on the wall above the bookshelf we'd built together a lifetime ago. "I call this room," Noah yelled, his mouth full of cheese. "You can't call a whole room, you goober," Lily retorted, but she was smiling. I looked at Liam across the pizza box. There was flour on his cheek and a profound, peaceful happiness in his eyes. This man, who understood foundations, had helped me build one that could withstand anything. He wasn't a porch. He was the entire supporting framework. Later, after the kids were finally asleep in their new rooms, Lily's already adorned with her rock collection on the windowsill, Noah's with his stuffed rabbit positioned strategically on the pillow. Liam and I escaped to the small, walled garden at the back of the house. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant hum of the city. He opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. We clinked them together softly. "To the new blueprint," he said. "To the architects," I replied. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of our new neighborhood. "A year ago," I began, my voice quiet in the darkness, "I was sitting on the floor of a different house, covered in white paint, convinced I was building my own tomb. I thought my story was over, that the best parts had already been written and the rest was just epilogue." Liam listened, his presence a quiet anchor. "I was so wrong," I whispered, the truth of it swelling in my chest. "The best part was the rebuilding, the choosing, the finding of these new, strong materials, the finding of you." I looked at him, my eyes glistening. "You saw the cracks and you didn't see a ruin. You saw a structure worth reinforcing." He reached out and cupped my face, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "I saw a masterpiece under repair." He leaned in and kissed me, and it tasted of red wine and a future I had designed myself. The next morning, I woke up in our new bedroom. The light was different. The sounds were different. Liam was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot into the kitchen to make coffee. I used one of Sage's wobbly mugs. I stood at the large kitchen window, watching the city come to life. I thought of the moment of discovery in the therapist's office, the flinch that shattered my world. I thought of the catharsis of the white paint, the centering of the clay, the terrifying thrill of the courtroom, the simple joy of a blanket fort, and the profound peace of a child's art table. The journey from there to here had been treacherous and beautiful. I was no longer Amelia, the victim of a betrayal. I was Amelia, the architect of her own life, a partner to a good man, a mother to 2 incredible children, the owner of a new key. Lily wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She came to stand beside me, leaning her head against my arm. "I like our new house, Mommy." "Me too, sweetie." "Me too." I poured a splash of coffee into her mug, filled the rest with milk and 2 sugars, just the way she liked it. We stood there together, mother and daughter, watching the sun climb over the rooftops of our new life. It wasn't a perfect story. There were still complexities with Ethan, challenges of blending a family, and the inevitable stresses of life. But the foundation was solid. The structure was sound. And the view from the kitchen window was everything I never knew I wanted. I had not just survived the upgrade. I had become the upgrade. And as I stood there, my daughter by my side and the man I loved sleeping down the hall, I knew with every fiber of my being that the best chapters were not behind me. They were just beginning.